You are 8 years old, torn from your Christian village in the Balkans by Ottoman soldiers. Your mother's screams still echo in your ears as you march with dozens of other boys along dusty roads toward a fate you cannot comprehend. The older boys whisper warnings in languages you barely understand, but their terror needs no translation. The soldiers call this the Devshirm, the child levy. Your village elder tried to explain it as an honor, a chance for education and advancement in the Ottoman court, but the boys around you know better. They have heard the stories whispered by survivors who escaped. Stories of what happens to Christian boys who disappear into the heart of the Ottoman Empire. You do not know it yet, but you are not seen as a child. You are seen as an investment, a commodity to be processed, modified, and sold to the highest bidder. Most of the boys marching beside you will be dead within the month. Those who survive will wish they had died with the others. This is the story of the Ottoman Empire's most carefully hidden atrocity, the systematic castration and enslavement of Christian boys who became the empire's eunuchs. For over 4 centuries, the Ottomans perfected a system of child abduction, mutilation, and psychological conditioning that created some of the most powerful men in the Islamic world while destroying their humanity in the process. What you are about to learn has been deliberately erased from most histories of the Ottoman Empire. The truth is too horrific for textbooks, too systematic for comfortable narratives about cultural exchange and imperial grandeur. But the evidence remains, buried in palace records, survivor testimonies, and archaeological discoveries that reveal the true cost of Ottoman power. The Devshirm system began in the 14th century as a solution to the Ottoman Empire's need for loyal administrators and elite soldiers. Unlike other Islamic states that relied on Arab or Turkish nobility, the Ottomans developed a revolutionary approach. They would create their own ruling class from the ground up, using Christian children stolen from conquered territories. Every few years, Ottoman officials would descend upon Christian villages throughout the Balkans, selecting boys between the ages of 8 and 18 for imperial service. The selection process was systematic and scientific. Officials looked for physical beauty, intelligence, and signs of good health. Boys with deformities, evidence of previous illness, or Jewish ancestry were rejected. Only the finest specimens would serve the Sultan. Parents were given no choice in the matter. Resistance meant death for the entire family. Some desperate families tried to hide their sons or deliberately injure them to make them unsuitable for selection. Ottoman records describe parents cutting off their children's fingers, scarring their faces, or even blinding them to save them from the Devshirm. Most of these attempts failed. The selected boys were immediately separated from their families and marched to collection points where they joined hundreds of other children torn from their homes. The psychological trauma began immediately. Children were forbidden to speak their native languages, forced to abandon their Christian names, and told their families were dead to them. Many boys attempted suicide during the journey. Ottoman records describe these deaths as acceptable losses in the acquisition of human material. The journey to Istanbul could take months, with children dying regularly from disease, exhaustion, and despair. But what waited for you in Istanbul was far worse than chains or starvation. Those who survived the march faced systematic mutilation, designed to transform them into perfect servants for the Ottoman palace. Upon arrival in Istanbul, the surviving boys underwent immediate medical examination to assess their suitability for different types of service. The healthiest and most intelligent were selected for the most prestigious positions, but this honor came with a price that few modern minds can comprehend. Complete castration performed by Ottoman court physicians with primitive tools and no anesthesia. The castration procedure was conducted in specialized facilities near the Topkapi Palace, away from public view, but close enough to the court that successful candidates could be immediately integrated into palace service. The process was designed for efficiency rather than survival. Ottoman physicians had perfected techniques that maximized the chances of creating useful eunuchs, while accepting that most subjects would die in the attempt. Boys selected for castration were first subjected to days of starvation and dehydration to reduce bleeding during the procedure. They were then restrained on wooden tables while court physicians removed both testicles and the penis using sharp knives or razors. The wounds were cauterized with hot irons or boiling oil to prevent bleeding, often causing additional tissue damage that led to lifelong complications. The mortality rate was staggering. Ottoman medical records suggest that between 70 and 90% of boys subjected to complete castration died within days of the procedure. Those who survived the initial trauma faced weeks of agony as their wounds slowly healed without proper medical care. Many died from infection, blood loss, or shock during this recovery period. The few boys who survived castration faced additional challenges that often proved fatal. The removal of sexual organs created immediate problems with urination that frequently led to kidney failure and death. Survivors required constant medical attention for months as their bodies adapted to the traumatic changes. Even those who lived often suffered lifelong health complications, including bone weakness, metabolic disorders, and chronic pain. But for the Ottoman court, these casualties were simply the cost of creating the perfect servants. Eunuchs who survived the ordeal were considered more valuable than gold because they had proven their resilience while being rendered incapable of sexual desires that might interfere with their duties or loyalty to the Sultan. Yet survival did not mean freedom. It meant entering a prison disguised as a palace. And what they faced next was worse than the knife. As eunuchs, they were trusted with access to the most private areas of the Ottoman palace, including the harem, where the Sultan's women lived in seclusion. Their castration was both their qualification and their prison. They called it service. In truth, it was a lifelong sentence. The harem system created one of history's cruelest ironies. Boys, who had been mutilated specifically to eliminate their sexuality, were placed in constant proximity to some of the most beautiful women in the Ottoman Empire. They could see, but never touch, guard, but never possess, serve, but never participate in the human experiences that defined adult life. And it was here, in the Sultan's harem, that the cruelest irony of all awaited these broken children. Eunuchs were assigned various roles within the harem, depending on their age, intelligence, and social skills. Younger eunuchs served as messengers and attendants, while older ones became administrators and guards. The most capable were elevated to positions of significant authority, managing the complex social and economic systems that kept hundreds of women housed, fed, and entertained within the palace walls. The psychological impact of this arrangement was devastating. Eunuchs lived surrounded by femininity, while being denied any possibility of normal relationships. They watched the Sultan enjoy intimate relationships with multiple wives and concubines, while they remained forever isolated from such experiences. Many developed deep psychological problems, including depression, anxiety, and dissociation from their own identities. Yet the system also created opportunities for advancement that would have been impossible for these boys in their original Christian villages. Some eunuchs rose to positions of enormous political influence, becoming advisors to sultans and controllers of imperial policy, but no amount of power could replace what was taken from them at 8 years old. The most successful eunuchs accumulated vast personal wealth and commanded respect throughout the Ottoman Empire, yet remained forever trapped by their childhood mutilation. The chief black eunuch, known as the Kislar Aga, became one of the most powerful officials in the Ottoman government. This position, always filled by a castrated African slave, controlled access to the Sultan through his management of the harem. The chief black eunuch could influence imperial decisions, control government appointments, and accumulate wealth that rivaled that of provincial governors. These powerful eunuchs created their own networks of influence and patronage within the Ottoman system. They sponsored architecture, supported artists and scholars, and established charitable foundations that benefited communities throughout the empire. Some became so influential that sultans consulted them on major policy decisions affecting millions of people. But even the most powerful eunuchs could never escape the reality of what had been done to them as children. They remained forever outsiders in Ottoman society, trusted precisely because they had been rendered incapable of founding dynasties or threatening the Sultan's bloodline. Their loyalty was guaranteed by their mutilation, their usefulness ensured by their isolation from normal human relationships, and their daily reality contained horrors that power could never erase. The daily lives of palace eunuchs were strictly regulated by protocols that reinforced their unique status within Ottoman society. They wore distinctive clothing that marked their position, followed specific behavioral codes that emphasized their servile nature, and participated in court ceremonies that highlighted their role as intermediaries between the masculine world of political power and the feminine space of the harem. Eunuchs developed their own subculture within the palace, creating relationships and hierarchies that provided some compensation for their isolation from broader Ottoman society. Senior eunuchs mentored younger ones, teaching them the complex social skills necessary to navigate palace politics while managing their unique psychological challenges. Many eunuchs formed intense emotional bonds with each other that resembled family relationships, creating surrogate kinship networks to replace the biological families they had lost as children. These relationships provided emotional support and practical assistance in a world where their castration made them permanent outsiders to normal social structures. Some eunuchs developed close relationships with the women they guarded, serving as confidants and advisors in matters ranging from court politics to personal relationships. These friendships offered both parties a form of emotional intimacy that was otherwise forbidden within the rigid social hierarchies of the Ottoman palace. The economic position of eunuchs within Ottoman society reflected their contradictory status as both slaves and administrators. While they legally remained the property of the Sultan, successful eunuchs could accumulate significant personal wealth through their administrative duties, gift-giving, and business activities conducted on behalf of their imperial masters. Wealthy eunuchs often became patrons of architecture and the arts, commissioning mosques, schools, and other public buildings that served their communities while providing them with a form of immortality denied to them through biological reproduction. Some of the most beautiful Ottoman buildings were funded by eunuchs seeking to create lasting legacies despite their inability to father children. The chief black eunuch traditionally controlled enormous financial resources through his management of imperial harems and his oversight of charitable foundations established by previous sultans and their families. This position often made the chief black eunuch one of the wealthiest individuals in the Ottoman Empire, commanding resources that exceeded those of many provincial governors. But wealth could never compensate for the fundamental losses these men had suffered as children. No amount of gold could restore their severed anatomy, reverse their psychological trauma, or grant them the possibility of normal family relationships that defined adult life for other Ottoman subjects. And as the empire began to decline, their torment would take on new dimensions. As the Ottoman Empire began its long decline in the 18th and 19th centuries, the eunuch system came under increasing criticism from both internal reformers and external observers. European diplomats and travelers wrote shocked accounts of the castration system, describing it as evidence of Ottoman barbarism that justified European intervention in Ottoman affairs. Internal Ottoman critics, influenced by both Islamic reformist movements and European ideas about human rights, began questioning whether the eunuch system was compatible with Islamic principles of justice and mercy. Some religious scholars argued that the systematic castration of children violated Islamic prohibitions against bodily mutilation and caused unnecessary human suffering. The practical effectiveness of the eunuch system also declined as the Ottoman Empire faced increasing military and economic pressure from European powers. The complex administrative structures that eunuchs had managed for centuries became obstacles to the rapid modernization that Ottoman rulers believed necessary for imperial survival. Gradual reforms in the 19th century reduced the role of eunuchs in Ottoman government, while maintaining some traditional functions within the imperial household. The devshirme system was officially abolished, ending the systematic abduction of Christian children, though some castration continued on a smaller scale, using African slaves purchased from traditional suppliers. The last chief black eunuch was dismissed in 1908, following the Young Turk Revolution that transformed the Ottoman Empire into a constitutional monarchy. This ended a tradition that had lasted over 5 centuries and created thousands of eunuchs who had served the Ottoman court while bearing the permanent physical and psychological scars of their childhood trauma. With the abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate in 1922, the eunuch system finally disappeared from Turkish society. The few surviving eunuchs became private citizens of the new Turkish Republic, though their unique status and traumatic histories made integration into normal social life extremely difficult. The deliberate erasure of eunuch experiences from Ottoman historical narratives began almost immediately after the system's abolition. Turkish nationalist historians, seeking to create positive narratives about Ottoman achievements, minimized discussion of practices like systematic castration that contradicted modern ideas about human rights and civilized governance. This historical amnesia extended to international scholarship about the Ottoman Empire, where researchers often focused on political, military, and cultural achievements, while avoiding detailed examination of practices that might seem barbaric to contemporary audiences. The experiences of eunuchs became footnotes in histories that preferred to emphasize Ottoman tolerance, administrative efficiency, and cultural sophistication. The absence of written testimonies from eunuchs themselves contributed to this historical silence. Unlike other groups who suffered under imperial systems, eunuchs left few first-person accounts of their experiences, partly because of their social isolation and partly because Ottoman court culture discouraged such personal narratives. Modern archaeological and archival research has begun to recover some evidence of eunuch experiences, but much remains hidden or lost. Palace records that might contain detailed accounts of castration procedures, mortality rates, and individual stories were often destroyed or remain inaccessible in Turkish archives. The systematic study of Ottoman eunuchs raises uncomfortable questions about how societies remember and forget their own histories of violence. The same empire that produced magnificent architecture, poetry, and legal systems also created institutions of systematic child abuse that continued for centuries with the support of religious, political, and social authorities. Understanding the reality of Ottoman eunuch systems challenges romanticized narratives about historical tolerance and cultural achievement. The boys who were castrated to serve Ottoman power represent the hidden costs of imperial grandeur that are often overlooked in academic and popular histories that emphasize political and cultural accomplishments. The legacy of Ottoman eunuch systems extends beyond historical scholarship to contemporary discussions about child rights, bodily autonomy, and the responsibilities of state power. The systematic nature of Ottoman child abduction and castration provides historical context for modern international laws protecting children from exploitation and abuse. Recognition of what happened to these boys also honors the memory of individuals whose suffering was erased from official histories. Every eunuch represented a child stolen from his family, mutilated against his will, and forced to live with the psychological and physical consequences of trauma inflicted for the convenience of imperial administrators. The story of Ottoman eunuchs reveals how easily civilized societies can normalize practices that cause immense human suffering when those practices serve the interests of powerful institutions. The same administrative systems that efficiently managed imperial territories also efficiently processed children into mutilated servants with the same attention to detail and lack of moral reflection. Modern efforts to understand and remember these experiences serve both historical accuracy and contemporary human rights advocacy. By acknowledging what happened to boys caught in the Ottoman eunuch system, we honor their memory while learning lessons that remain relevant for protecting vulnerable populations from institutional abuse. The voices of these castrated boys were silenced by their trauma and erased by historical amnesia, but their experiences remain embedded in the architectural, political, and cultural achievements they helped create. Every Ottoman building funded by eunuch wealth, every political decision influenced by eunuch advice, carries traces of the childhood suffering that made such contributions possible. Their story reminds us that behind every imperial achievement lay real human costs that are often hidden from comfortable historical narratives. The boys who became Ottoman eunuchs paid the ultimate price for imperial power, their bodies, their futures, and their voices in history. But the Ottomans were not unique in perfecting systems of institutional child abuse. Rome had its own castrated servants. Byzantium continued these practices for 1,000 years. Even the Vatican maintained eunuch choirs well into the modern era. All of these civilizations perfected their own hidden systems of systematic mutilation and abuse. If you want me to uncover those buried horrors too, to expose what history tried to erase about the true foundations of power, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which empire's darkest secrets you want revealed next. Understanding their experiences demands both historical honesty and moral reflection about the true foundations of political authority.